progress now. Poland, of course, Victoria, and Romania, Bosnia. Great. Of all the countries that have been mentioned so far, I have to admit the only one I haven't been to is Georgia. I lived in Poland. I visited Croatia a lot, Latvia a lot, Bosnia. I've been a lot to Romania and Poland. I've actually I lived in Poland and I've spent a lot of time in Romania. So, including Bacau. So hopefully I have some idea of where you are and what you're doing. So I think I'll just introduce myself now. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are. Where I am here in Izmir in southern Turkey, it is just the afternoon, coming up to 1 o'clock. My name is Grant Kempton, and I'm the manager for product and consultancy for Middle East, North Africa, and Turkey at Pearson. I've also been a teacher for more than 30 years, both in K-12 and in tertiary. 6 of those years were spent teaching in Poland, in Radom and in Warsaw. So no hey to everybody. Jak się masz? That'll do for my Polish for today. But it's lovely to see you all here. And as I said, I've been involved in management consultancy, methodology, digital acceleration, and a teacher and teacher and manager. So hopefully I have something that I can share with you today. So I'm going to pull up my screen now, if I can, and make sure we're sharing sound and optimization. And I will go straight to the presentation, I hope. Okay. One of the problems with this is, of course, I can't see the chat when it's going. So I'm going to pull up the chat very quickly. Can we all see the screen? Can some people let me know if you can see the screen? Yes, excellent. Super duper. Okay, so this afternoon or this morning, we're going to be talking about kicking and screaming, digital acceleration in education 2019, 2022 and on. So this is something that's been said, and I've heard this a lot over the last 2 years, that the last 3 years have dragged teachers kicking and screaming into the digital age. So really what I want to do is question if that's true or not. Is it true that teachers have been dragged kicking and screaming? And I will argue that in fact it's not true. And whatever kicking and screaming was involved was not the fault of the teachers, but the fault lay elsewhere. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. So hopefully, let's see if the screen will allow me to change slides. There we go. So I'm going to start by telling a story. And as we are now in the digital age, I suppose I better follow a story arc that is most common in the digital age. Anybody who's played computer games like The Witcher or Ghost of Tsushima or any of those sort of games, or if you're really into the new game Elden Ring, which I got as my birthday present, lucky me, then you'll know that the stories of these games, they always follow what we call the Lord of the Rings story arc. You could also call it the Star Wars story arc, because pretty much Star Wars follows the same style as well. So what is this story arc? Well, usually it starts with a Garden of Eden situation where everybody's happy and they have a great life, but there is sort of, in the Garden of Eden, there is an apple, there is a snake, there is a threat of things getting worse, whether it be, I don't know, the stormtroopers or the ring that Bilbo Baggins has on his finger. And that's followed by the ruin, which is when everything goes horribly, horribly wrong. When the planet gets blown up, when the wraiths are chasing the hobbits, when everything goes wrong. That's usually followed by a sort of return where you get to what seems like a new dawn, a new start, but it's a bit of a false one. You sort of take a breath. For example, I don't know, when Luke Skywalker learns to use his lightsaber, when he becomes a Jedi, that would be an example. Or when the hobbits get to meet Galadriel, those would be the form of return. But then comes the unveiling, when the real evil comes. It's not the ruin. There you just see a shape of it. The unveiling is when the real evil comes. And when everything is out in the open. And that would, of course, be the invasion of Minas Tirith in Lord of the Rings, and the threat of the Death Star in Star Wars. And then it finishes, of course, with a redemption of sorts. It's not a return to the way it was before, because you can never return, but there is a happy ending, but there is a sort of not a total happy ending, as you remember the people who lost their lives or the bad times, etc. And this is a sort of standard story arc for computer games and for fantasy, science fiction movies, etc. So very much a story arc of the period that we're living in. So I'm going to follow that story arc as I tell this story today. So we'll start off with the Garden of Eden that we were living in between 2002 and 2019. So how would I describe this Garden of Eden? Well, a world where the teacher and course book was king, where the only technology was video and CFR had brought milk and honey to the language teaching garden. Suddenly we all were teaching the same way. We were all focusing on communication, and we had these lovely print course books that did the work for us. And then now technology was allowing us to do videos and choose videos and so on. And it was all wonderful and it was great. However, there was a snake in the garden. And there was an apple of temptation. What was it? YouTube videos. We all started using YouTube videos in classes, especially if you were in primary and kindergarten, you'd use song videos. What was the video? What was the one that I could never, ever forget? Do you like, was it? Do you like something? Da 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 da. Do you like da 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 da? And then you end up saying, yucky, no, I don't. And it was the videos like this. And that was YouTube provided those. We had computer marking of tests. If you worked in large organizations or universities, you were probably using optical forms, and all the tests were multiple choice or multiple matching. And there was only one answer for every question, and this was great. Well, maybe it wasn't. We'll come back to that. CD-ROMs, where we could stick them in the computer and we could then put through a projector, show things on the board and have some form of interactivity in the classroom. Sometimes those CD-ROMs didn't work, mind you, and sometimes you went into class and it wasn't how you wanted. Online homework appeared, where you could delegate homework online. Students would do it and it would be marked and you get a report card, etc., etc. Interactive resources of different types that you could find in different places online. So this was all great. You know, we're all going in the right direction. This is such a very tasty apple that we're following. And the traditional CB, course book, workbook, teacher book paradigm that we'd used in the early days of the noughties came under threat. That apple turned out to have a worm inside. And that worried us. And it made us very, very cautious of technology. What it created in that period of 2002 to 2019 was a digital concern, a suspicion that teachers had of the validity and reliability of digital and online learning. And they were right. There was something fundamentally wrong with digital and learning. Any teacher who's been in a class with a CD-ROM or a video or a YouTube video where the internet didn't work, or the computer crashed, or you pressed a button and it didn't do what it wanted to do, and you had to explain it to 20 kids in front of you, you weren't wrong. You were absolutely right to be suspicious. The first thing is fear of things going wrong. As I said, I've described that already. Teachers were used to being in control of their classroom, and when things go wrong and students start getting nervous, it's embarrassing. It makes us feel uncomfortable. We begin to question ourselves. So it's no wonder that teachers would turn away from digital when things went wrong. Lack of training. There were very few training courses given for teachers for the main certificates, international certificates, that rarely dealt with digital until 4 or 5 years ago. There was very little training. You would get your CD-ROMs and they'd say, go ahead and use them. Nobody would tell you how to use them. There wasn't even awareness training for teachers, in fact, because if you're going to use something like YouTube, you've got to have some awareness of what you're looking at. There was no practical support. Did you get lesson plans on how to use things? Did they come with lesson plans that you could use and how you could integrate digital into your classroom? No, not normally. And that's because the people who were making the digitals were not teachers, former teachers. Most of them didn't come from ELL. I'm going to call them tech, or if I'm being nice, I'm going to call them ed tech. And one of the things we know about EdTech is that they spoke a completely different language from teachers. What their expectations of what you could do or what you should do, and what your expectations of what they created should do, were not the same. And they spoke a language which I like to call the alpha beta language. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on. But fundamentally, EdTech did not really understand what it was to be a teacher in a classroom with digital. And we'll come back to that in a little while. Questionable educational benefits. Well, the problem with taking things off the internet is that the things that you take off the internet are not actually designed for education. Even that guy strumming his guitar with his wonderful kindergarten and primary songs, he just wrote songs. He wrote songs with simple language. He didn't do anything else with it. And YouTube videos, quite often, you'd get halfway through the video and you'd suddenly find something that was totally unsuitable for your classroom. Or you would find the level of English would go up and down, up and down, up and down, which and your students couldn't use it. So using these sorts of things, their actual benefit to the classroom was very little. They were more cosmetic benefits to make the kids happy, but they didn't actually have educational benefits. And one of the other ones is kids know better. Quite often, kids knew better than we did. They knew how to use the computer. They knew how to use the technology. And also, a lot of the stuff that we were given that was coming from EdTech wasn't as good as the stuff the kids were actually using themselves in their spare time. A wonderful example of this is Minecraft. Minecraft sort of swept the children's world of digital between about 2009 and 2000, and they're still doing so, in fact, but certainly between 2009 and 2018, to the point where Minecraft even invested in a Minecraft education version. And lots of kids use this, and a few teachers realized that they could use it in the classroom, but not all. And I remember observing a lesson as part of my consultancy with a school, and the teacher was trying to teach the students about things that came from under the ground, like coal and iron and so on and so forth. And instead of using something that they related to, she took a really, really boring YouTube video and showed it to them. And the students were really, really, really bored. But when she checked the vocabulary, they knew more than she did. And she was really, really surprised that they knew more than she did. One of the students shouted, "Redstone, teacher, what is redstone?" And she said, "Well, how do you know these words?" And the kids looked at her as though she was stupid and said, "Teacher, we all play Minecraft." Do you know what the teacher said? The teacher said, "Oh, you mean that silly game? Well, only boys play that." Immediately, she'd lost the whole class. Plus, she completely got a revolution at the back of the class with the girls who all played Minecraft. Kids know better. And this put a big strain on us to make sure that we stayed up and stayed thinking about the digital acceleration of kids and the digital world of kids. And that's hard. And the internet. How many of you worked in schools where there is no internet, or where you're stuck in the basement of a school where your classrooms are the only classrooms that don't have internet, and yet you're still expected to use the digital? So all of these things provided digital concern for teachers, where teachers did not trust the technology they were being given with. And I think each one of these are valid concerns. Teachers are not wrong to be worried about those things. They're absolutely right. So when we look at change, we look at 5 different groups of people who go through change. The first group are the innovators, who are about 2.5%. Then you get the early adopters, 13.5%, early majority, 34%, late majority, 34%, and 16% laggards. Now, the most important for us is actually the innovators, early adopters, and laggards. Laggards are the ones who will never change. Whenever you bring something new to your school or to your institution, these are the ones who will always refuse to do it, who will always criticize it. No matter what you do, they will never change. A teacher was telling me, a head of department was telling me only a couple of weeks ago, that before the pandemic, they had quite a lot of elderly teachers who basically had very, very simple phones that didn't even have WhatsApp on them. And they all retired during the pandemic. They would rather retire than try and deal with technology. Those are laggards, and that's their decision, and that's fine. Innovators are, unless you're an innovator, are the ones that you laugh at. Those are the ones who try everything new, even when it doesn't work. And we never follow them. You know, they come in and say, oh, look, there's this new form of technology. It's wonderful. I'm going to use it in my class. And we all sort of laugh under our breath and say, yeah, and ignore them. The ones who really matter are the early adopters. These are the people who have influence, the people who you listen to, who you respect. These are the people who take on things. And when they take it on, you start saying, oh, well, maybe I should try that. So innovators, laggards have very little effect. The real people who affect the majority are the early adopters. And in the period 2002, 2019, largely digital stayed with the innovators. Very few early adopters took up digital. So it was sort of that 2.5 plus some of the 13.5, but the vast majority of teachers remained suspicious, concerned about digital and technology. And then came the ruin in 2020. I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. Now, you might ask, why have I got a woman laughing in the background? Because I think that was the woman in January 2020. I think none of us in January 2020, despite what we saw in the news, ever thought we would get to where we got to. The fact that by beginning of April 2020, just about every school, certainly across Europe, across most of the world, had shut down. And we were all having to deal with a completely different reality. It is what we call emergency remote teaching, ERT. It is not teaching. It is not teaching as we know it. To consider that teachers were being asked to teach as teaching is to fundamentally misunderstand the challenge that was in front of teachers through March to June 2020. Emergency remote teaching requires completely different skills and a completely different approach to learning. I'm sure all of you, as you struggled in those early months with Zoom and Teams, began to quickly realize this. And it was a very, very difficult time for everybody as we tried to change the way we taught. So what does this mean? Well, as I said, teachers were forced to adapt to new pedagogical concepts and modes of delivery for which they had not been trained. Now, remember what I said earlier, teachers hadn't been trained for digital full stop, digital and technology. There was very little training out there. And then they were basically thrown in at the deep end of the swimming pool. There was now no option. But initially, the training wasn't there because most organizations weren't ready for it. Most people weren't ready for it. And then I think it was sort of end of April, beginning of May through over the next 12 months, teachers were literally drowned in training. It was literally coming out of the walls left, right, and center, to the point where, and I want to make this very clear, how honored I am that 174 participants are now listening to me, because we all know that the numbers of participants in training over the last few months have gone down alarmingly, simply because people are burnt out with training. So the fact that 174 people came today to listen to poor old me, thank you very much indeed. It's the best birthday present anybody could have. Thank you. So moving on, we're looking at the pedagogical concepts and modes of delivery that needed to be changed, because which they haven't been trained for. So what were these? What was the teacher's skill shift? What was required? The first thing was to embrace a growth mindset. I think all of us don't like change that much in our classrooms because we like to control our environment. We like to be in control of our teaching environment. But in online, it was a completely new set of risks, a completely new set of situations to deal with. And it was no good us sitting back and saying, I can teach the way I did yesterday or the day before. It meant we had to embrace a growth mindset. We had to push ourselves further and take on new styles. We had to start taking risks. We had to be able to adapt fast to emerging technologies and teaching strategies, because there's no question, suddenly technologies jumped. certainly during 2021, if not in 2020. And new strategies appeared and new formats appeared. And teachers had to adapt fast. We had to learn how to use Zoom. We had to learn how to use Teams. We had to learn how to use breakout rooms and interactive whiteboards. The technology that was being given by publishing companies and other organizations started jumping forward as well. So all of these things we had to take on board. We had to thrive in a collaborative and dynamic environment. So what do I mean here? The dynamic environment is that you don't control your environment anymore. When you're in a classroom, you control it. It's your classroom, it's your desks, it's your chairs. You can move them around as you like. But now you're dealing with, if you like, 24 classrooms in a class, if you've got 24 students, which could be somebody's bedroom, somebody's lounge, somebody's bathroom even. Unfortunately, we've all experienced that from time to time. And those have to be very, very dynamic. What you do have to take into account environments that you can't even see. And this requires collaboration. You can no longer teach down to your students. You have to collaborate with your students because they're in a completely different environment from you. You can't send them out of the room or send them to the head teacher if they don't do what they're supposed to do. You have to collaborate. And this requires a completely different form of interaction between teacher and student. It becomes student-centered, therefore, and not system-centered. What I mean here is I don't think you can just follow a course book from page 1 to page 220, like page 1 exercise 1 to page 220 exercise 10 online. It doesn't work that way. You have to be much more flexible. You have to think about what the students can do, not only in their environment, but what they can actually do with the technology and what they can do to learn. You've got to look at ways that how students can learn on their own and with you. And you've got to be able to think more about the resources that you've got and how you use them. So it is not the system that is driving you. It is not the technology necessarily that's driving you. It is what your students can do, what can be attained with your students online or in a hybrid situation. So this meant a major skill shift in the way we think. You have to be a mentor that guides. You can't just teach. And that really made us think very differently in the way that we do, because especially during the first part of lockdown, when we could see when students were still studying from home, that basically their psychology changed. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. Now, some countries have only come out of lockdown very recently, in the last 3-4 months. Some of you have been out of lockdown for more than a year. But I think all of us noticed the difference in our students when they came back to school, that they weren't the same kids. And we'll come back to that in a minute. And it also meant, because of that, we had to be able to create, hold on, I have to move that bar, be able to create and carry out meaningful and deeply personal learning relationships, not straight off the page. You had to communicate more with your students. So in a sense, it was a great opportunity to have more meaningful communication, providing, of course, you can use breakout rooms. And you can move between breakout rooms. So all of those things were things that we had to carefully consider. The truth is, not all teachers will make that transition, because teachers weren't initially trained to make that transition. They were not prepared to make that transition. It requires a very different type of teacher. So the teacher who worked well in the classroom did not necessarily transition to the digital classroom. And in the same way, teachers don't necessarily transition to a hybrid classroom. Remember the teachers I talked about who were still using your basic mobile phone without WhatsApp. But it's also true that not all students will be successful online or hybrid learners either. We're going to watch now a little video. I'm just going to show you a bit of it because it does go on for a long time. But I'd like you to watch this video for a few minutes and tell me, well, you can write it in the chat. I'll have a quick look in a minute. Did you experience something like this?
Morning, everyone.
Good morning, Mr. O'Rourke.
We'll just give it another minute and we'll give a few more people a chance to log on.
Sir, why are you wearing a tracksuit?
Good morning, Mr. O'Rourke.
We'll just give it another minute and we'll give a few more people a chance to log on.
Sir, why are you wearing a tracksuit?
Because I'm at home, Darren.
It looks weird, sir.
Well, I'm sorry, but it's all a little weird.
What's the point of studying, sir, if the exams are going to be cancelled?
Look, we don't know if the exams are going to be cancelled, okay? We have to assume that they're on, right?
We're all gonna die anyway.
We're not all going to die.
Some of us might, sir. I'd say Mrs. Feeney is high risk.
Mrs. Feeney is fine. Now, how did you get on with question 1 of the worksheet?
Was there a worksheet?
The one I attached to the email?
There wasn't any attachment, sir.
What?
You said you'd attached it, but there wasn't anything there.
Yeah. Well, why didn't anyone tell me? Right, well, I'm resending it now as a drive file.
You should put up the questions as a TikTok.
A what tuck? Is that teaching software?
Just put it up on your Instagram story, sir.
I'm not on Instagram. Just write it down for now if you don't mind. X squared minus 4.
I don't have a pen, sir.
Okay.
Ma, do you have a pen?
I'm busy, ask your father.
Dad, I need a pen.
He's watching Lord of the Rings.
Evan, mute your mic,
I
please.
thought he's working from home. Oh, yeah, sorry,
Evan,
sir. Yeah.
mute your mic, please. Yeah, right.
Will you just
So
give us
X
a
squared
fucking
minus 4
pen,
is
will
equal
you?
to 5.
I didn't get the email, sir.
Okay, well, I'll resend it to you quickly. What's your email, James, please?
James.
Okay, so
Oh, morning, everyone.
I didn't want to see that again. There we go. So has anybody experienced anything like that before? That sort of behavior by teachers or students. Did you ever in that situation where things didn't go the way you wanted to and the students gave you more hassle than you expected? I know many people, I know I certainly did. Absolute chaos, yes, absolutely. More or less, but yes, absolutely. Okay, so what are the factors that affect students in these sort of situations? Let's see if my thing can work now. Stress. It's a highly stressful period we've been through in the last year, 2 years, and that stress affects students. It's also connected to motivation. One of the things that we talk about, and I'm going to talk about it a bit more when we get to socialization, is that in a student's mind, in a child's mind in particular, between the ages of about 5 and about 14, 15, there is a clear demarcation between home life and school life. Students think that at home they don't need to work, they don't need to be educated. And at school, that's education zone. That's when they have to follow the rules. As soon as you mix those up, motivation goes out the window. And students become demotivated. And also, in many students' eyes, out of sight, out of mind, that if the teacher can't see what you're doing, then you don't have to do it. Learning time got skewed. It wasn't your normal 9 to 5 day anymore. It just didn't work like that. Classroom times changed, lessons got cancelled, etc. And if you went into the hybrid period, which many of you have been in for the last year, when you've got half the students in class and you've got half the students out of class, it just plays havoc with the way you prepare your lessons and how you do your learning. The socialization shift. So I've already talked about this crossover between school and home life, but it also meant, especially during lockdown, that students just had to find new ways to socialize. They weren't meeting their friends face to face, they weren't going out, so they were meeting lots of friends online, and that's a very, very, very different form of socialization. Certain social skills changed. I won't say that social skills disappeared, because socialization does take place online. It's just a different form of socialization. But is that a right socialization if on its own for the future? Probably not. Blurring of context boundaries, I've already mentioned. A shift in parental relationships as well, because parents have now became much more involved in teaching and education, because they could actually see what was going on. If you're working with children in the private industry, or private schools, or private language schools or so on, parents started thinking about how much money they were spending, and what they were seeing online, was that worth the money they were spending? They certainly started to complain more when they didn't think their kids were doing well or getting on. So parental relationships changed, and parents became even more of a problem than they were before, in a way. But for me, the most important thing is ennui. And this is something that really affects students. Now, I don't know how many of you understand what ennui means. That's basically this feeling of dislocation, demotivation, stress, and even depression because of a lack of knowledge of environment or boredom. And I think this really hits students, this form of ennui, and ennui leads to stress and motivation. So to ignore the psychological effect of students of digital learning and hybrid learning is a serious mistake. And it's something that we really need to take account of as teachers. A digital student needs to be self-disciplined, self-motivated, self-directed, good at time management. Now, all of those, let's be honest, I'm sure you can think of lots of students who are none of those things, especially teenagers. But all of those things are required because the teacher is not physically there. The student has to learn in online learning to do things themselves. They've got to get themselves out of bed and dressed for the first class and sitting in front of the computer screen. They have to be self-motivated to learn because all the tools that teachers use face-to-face are not available. They have to be self-directed. They have to be able to see how they're learning. They have to be able to value what they're learning because they're getting a lot less feedback. And they have to be good at time management because of those crossovers of context. This is hard for students, especially students if they've been going to traditional classrooms where everything is spoon-fed for them, because online teaching cannot spoon-feed. They also need to have, and I need to move this bar again if it's bothering you, let me move it up there for a second. You need to have a computer, the internet, an internet signal that actually works, and digital resources to go on that computer and the internet. Now, all of that, maybe for most of you think that's obvious, but it isn't obvious, especially when you get down to state school level. Some of you may work in very deprived areas where there is no internet, or the parents are using a very old computer where all the things that you want to do don't allow the child to use the internet. Maybe the digital resources are too advanced to work on their computers. All of these are serious issues. Learning space, and this is, for me, the most important one. I'd like to share some facts. One of the facts that I didn't mention earlier is that 42% of American teachers think they know technology that they use in school less well than their students. 42% in the US. In the UK, more than 58% of teachers would rather not use digital in the classroom because it embarrasses them in front of their students. It's very interesting, isn't it? 9%, here's some more facts. 9% of students in OECD countries have nowhere to study at home. Parents not being involved is proven to lead to children not engaging. So you don't really have a choice. Parents need to be involved if they're at class, because if parents don't involve themselves in the learning process, so parents get up in the morning at 8 o'clock, go to work, both of them, come back at 6 o'clock, and the child's been home alone all day, chances are the children won't engage in learning. In the UK, use of internet in 2019, 52% of 3 to 4-year-olds were using internet, and 82% of 5 to 7-year-olds. So the idea that digital internet, etc., is not part of children's lives, that battle was lost years ago. So the idea of not having internet and not having digital and technology in a classroom or in learning is just alien. And that war has long been lost. It's no longer worth fighting. So we've been through the ruin. 2020 to 2021 saw the return. Remember, this is not the end of the story, though. So let's walk the battlefield. Let's walk the battlefield of 2020. What did we find out as we walked the battlefield? What we found out was there was a chasm between ed tech and teachers. I've already mentioned this. It's called the alpha beta language. So let me explain this. Some of you may have used computer games, PlayStation, etc. I've already mentioned that I'm a PlayStation fanatic, and I play computer games and with my kids. Now, if you've done that, then you know that most games and software does not come out in its final version. It comes out what the ed tech and tech call alpha and beta versions. These alpha and beta versions are not complete games. They are games with bugs. And what happens is over a period of 1, 2, or 3 months, or even longer, there are updates given. And these updates update the game and solve the bugs and solve the issues. So effectively, when you buy a game online or in a PlayStation or wherever, you're buying a game that doesn't actually work. It maybe only works 80 or 90% of the time. And over the weeks and months, it moves up to 100%. Now that's all very well for games, but it's not all very well for the classroom. So this was the problem. EdTech and tech are creating software for the classroom, which are A/B, alpha and beta. But teachers are taking these into the classroom, and these alpha and beta versions don't work. There are bugs in them. Things that they expected to do didn't work. Their sign-on is too complicated. All of these things. And teachers learned not to trust the technology and not to trust what EdTech was providing them. This is the chasm. And this chasm became very obvious during the pandemic. So this forced EdTech to take on a new approach. Courseware wasn't digitally ready. In other words, there were lots of print courseware out there in March 2020, which didn't have digital. And suddenly all the publishing companies had to go crazy about getting digital versions out as quickly as possible. And they're still catching up. Lack of education-friendly resources. A lot of resources were out there, but not many of them were educational friendly. So we had to start thinking about how do we make things that are educationally friendly? How do we create online lessons which are actually education friendly, which actually have a syllabus, we're actually taught by trained, qualified teachers of a high quality, which can support teachers in the classroom. Lack of training for teachers. Yeah, right at the beginning of the pandemic, teachers were thrown into Zoom and Teams and they had no training. So we all went crazy and gave you far too much training, perhaps. Assessment was lagging behind digitally. Since 2012, it has been possible to test the way we've always wanted to test digitally. Some of you may have heard of an exam called PTE Academic. PTE Academic is a full digital exam that marks writing and speaking and marks it reliably. A computer marking writing and speaking. And that's the way it should be. The idea of moving to digital in the early noughties was a mistake. We shouldn't have touched digital testing in the early days because computers and technology weren't strong enough to test properly. So we ended up doing multiple choice, multiple matching and optical forms. And this is what we call the curse of DPT. I haven't got this on any of my slides, so try and remember that. The curse of DPT. What is DPT? Discrete point testing. Discrete point testing. So what this meant is you would write a question that tested simple past. So for example, yesterday I blank to the bank. A go, B goes, C went, D gone. Now that sentence, all you are testing is simple past. That's it. Nothing else. That is a discrete point. And this is what multiple choice and multiple matching does. And we started doing it so that computers could mark it easily and it be reliable. But the problem with this has nothing to do with language and language methodology. You cannot test a discrete point. If there is one question on your test that tests simple past and the student gets it wrong, is it because they don't know the simple past? Is it because they thought the question was so easy they thought it was a trap? Is it because they didn't understand the other words of the sentence? And maybe they can use simple past really, really well when it's connected to lots of other things. Because when we speak and when we write, we don't just write simple past. We use all sorts of forms and all sorts of things together. You can't test language unless you're testing multiple things at the same time. Human beings can't do that. And old digital couldn't do that. New digital can. So our problem was assessment was lagging behind digitally. I'm glad to say that now we're seeing a huge digital acceleration in this way, that soon I hope, ideally hope, that multiple choice and multiple matching will be a thing of the past and teachers can teach communicatively and actually have digital tests that test communicatively. So we don't have this negative backwash effect that if you have a class in grade 8, there are teachers giving homeworks of multiple choice in grade 5 to prepare them for the test. That's not language learning. In this case, assessment does not serve learning. Learning serves assessment. And that is fundamentally wrong. The role of home learning was misunderstood. We didn't really understand home learning. Let's be honest, up until 2019, the idea of home learning was we do the real learning in class, then we give them homework to do on Friday afternoon. We probably waste half an hour on Friday afternoon giving out the homework. They do it over the weekend, and then we waste another lesson on Monday morning marking the homework. And what do we learn from that marking of homework? Almost nothing, because I can't see which students got each question right or wrong. That idea of home learning, we realized during the period of the pandemic, was wrong. That actually, if you have a digitally accelerated support in learning, you can actually have learning take place at home. You can have learning marked at home. So instead of having 25 hours a week, or 10 hours a week, or 8 hours a week, or 4 hours a week in English learning going on in school, you can double that by doing it at home. Home learning was now possible. We'd proved it. It was now the responsibility of organizations like Pearson to come up with the resources to make it work. Differentiation took on a new meaning. I think we started to see the realm, the possibility for differentiation in online learning. I saw more students during the pandemic getting specialized learning than they ever did in the classroom. Differentiation came to the foreground, and that was great. And another thing that was great was people actually realized that digital wasn't quite as bad as they thought it was, because many people had steered clear of digital because of so many things had gone wrong. Now that they were forced to use it because of the situation, they began to see that actually digital wasn't that bad. And they started taking more risks. That's that. So this is my quote from something I've written recently. The most uplifting sign of the pandemic was the way teachers threw off their concerns and took to digital to ensure their students' education. I cannot honor teachers enough. What teachers have been put through for the last 3 years is a horror story. And the way that teachers have let go their fears and their concerns and put the future of their students first. We were actually looking at the possibility of lost years of learning, and teachers with very, very little support and very, very little encouragement took it on themselves to make a difference. They took to digital. They started really digging deep into the digital worlds to support their students. They brought hybrid into the classroom. They listened to students more. They took that effort. And I really don't think, I think you are the unsung heroes of the pandemic, as well as nurses and doctors. People should also think about teachers, because it's been a huge task to support students through a very, very difficult period, and you should be proud of yourselves. And I think that has made the future look good. If it wasn't for teachers, we wouldn't be where we are today. And this is, I can show this with this chart. If you remember this chart, innovators, early adopters, I said we were here in 2019. In 2022, we're here. So what's happened during the pandemic is the early adopters realized what was going on and took to digital because they knew they had to. The early majority saw those early adopters doing it and said, well, if they can do it, maybe I should try. And once they'd done it, the late majority, those people who maybe not have used digital at all, who may have thought that they could just teach the same way that they had before the pandemic, started to take it on as well. So this is where we are now. 84% of teachers are using digital or some form of digital in their classroom now. And about 70% of them didn't do so before the pandemic. And that's a huge improvement. And that's a huge indicator of a better future for education. But unfortunately, the unveiling was ahead of us. The winter of 2021, and evil really showed its face. How did it show its face? Omicron, war, financial instability, and shortages. One of the things that you may not be aware of, although I'm sure you're going to be aware of very, very soon, is the massive paper shortage that exists in the world today. There is a distinct possibility that parents, teachers, institutions may not get all the books they hope to get this year. simply because there is a paper shortage. The publishers like Pearson and so on have taken steps to build up stock of paper so that we can do printing, but that's not going to be the same for everybody. Paper shortage is a major problem. So digital is still going to be with us. It's still going to be a major part of how we move forward. I also think it's much better in many ways because I'm sure all of you at some time or another have not got your books at the right time, etc. But if you have an access code, hopefully, it should be much easier to get access to your books. Now, many people have said that hybrid was the savior during the pandemic, that this ability to be able to teach online and teach face-to-face saved our lives. Well, that's not entirely true, because for teachers in particular, hybrid in many ways was a false savior. Why do I think so? Because teachers are not only being asked to go back to the old workload, they're now being asked to continue with the new workload on top of the old workload. So all those extra things you did and all that hard work you put in because you believed and because you cared during the pandemic, you're being expected to do that on top of the work you were doing. So if we want to talk about wellness, if we want to talk about psychological support, it's teachers who need it, because so much more is being asked of them now than was being asked before. Trying to teach a classroom where you've got 20 students in the classroom and 4 students at home looking at a screen is hell on earth. Because how do you manage to teach them all fairly? It's almost impossible. It's a Sisyphean task. And I'm going to talk about that in particular in a moment. But there's also students and parents. Students and parents are unsure because of what they went through in the pandemic. They're more demanding and less confident of education, and they're more commercially minded. They're in a time where there are financial crises, where books are not arriving. People are saying, well, if I'm spending money on books or I'm spending money on schools and education, I should be getting more for what I'm doing. And of course, that responsibility ends up being dropped on the teacher's shoulders. So people like myself, people like Pearson and any other organization, and let me be very clear here, we are not a publisher. Pearson is not a publisher, it's an education solution provider, because we don't just publish books, we do so many other things. It is organizations like ourselves who've got to start asking ourselves, how can we take that workload off the teachers? How can we take away the uncertainty and the worry that students and parents have so that that is not placed on the teacher's shoulders? And we believe in this new world forward, that's our responsibility. And if we fail in that responsibility, we have no right to be coming to you and supporting you. So this is what the traditional teacher or head of department has to face. It's a jigsaw which is incomplete. Every year, the heads of department of schools all over the world have to put together the jigsaw for the coming year, and teachers have to do the same. They'll have a course book from one organization. They'll have a test from another organization or written by somebody in school. They'll have maybe external tests, international tests that have nothing to do with the course book or the internal tests you have. They're working to a completely different syllabus. You'll have readers with no support on how they will work with your course. Everything is different. And next year, you may move to a different course book, which has a completely different syllabus where you've got to create the whole jigsaw again. There is always one piece that doesn't fit. And you have to spend all your time trying to make the pieces fit. Today, in the environment that we exist in today, this is something that teachers shouldn't need to do. This responsibility should not be on your shoulders. It should be on ours. And this is our necessity. So what would be a salvation of sorts? You remember what I said about the end? The salvation of sorts. We reach the happy ending. It's not a perfect ending, but it is an ending that we can live with. What I believe is that teachers need from us a comparable, measurable, pleasurable, effective learning experience anytime, any place, anywhere. Feel free to take a picture of that. That's my quote, and I love it. A comparable, measurable, pleasurable, effective learning experience anytime, any place, anywhere. And not just for the student or the parent, but for the teacher too. We believe that if such a solution exists, it needs to cover these 4 areas. It needs to be understanding the right level of challenge for their learners, to understand where learners are, to place them on personalized learning paths, because that's what parents expect today. They don't want to hear about the herd of cows in your classroom who all have black spots. They want to know about their cow, their child, and how they are different from others. And they want personalized learning paths, and they are demanding it. They want to make sure that we want to make sure that it is not too easy, but also not too difficult, that there is some resources and support for students who can't keep up. There are resources and support that can be touched on a touch of a button that challenge the stronger students. As well as that, those resources have to have engagement and relevance. They must boost enjoyment to drive learner motivation and performance. I'm sure over the next few months, if you haven't heard already, of our partnership with Disney. And this was primarily on the idea, I should say Disney and Marvel, because Marvel and Star Wars are all part of Disney, to boost enjoyment amongst primary and kindergarten learners and perhaps even lower secondary. And we need to boost enjoyment because, as we said before, our students are far more digitally motivated than we are and much more aware of the digital world. And we have to motivate with engaging and relevant content to them, not relevant content to education as we see it, or what was relevant to us when we were learners, designed with thousands of partnerships, just like Disney and Marvel and BBC. Building a growth mindset to help learners thrive by believing in the power of their own abilities, not system-driven, but student-driven, where teachers are no longer teachers, but mentors, to help them experience success with carefully paced course and regular assessment, carefully paced and carefully placed courses and assessment. Learning that takes place both in the classroom and at home, real learning, not just assigning exercises that they may or may not do. And even if they do them, they copy them. And even if they do them, you don't know whether they got them right or wrong. And to help them own their learning by reflection points that assessment provides. In other words, map the journey of the student, not just from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, but through their whole learning experience from the moment they enter the school to the day they leave. To demonstrate the student's skills and your skills, to not only teach, but be able to accredit your students. To give learners the proof that they need to take their next big step and therefore the motivation to benefit from the power AR really has to test real language use, guarantee accuracy, fairness, and reduce learners' stress. And also make sure that that AI is not alpha, is not beta, but does everything you expect it to do and more. It is our responsibility not to just give you what you think you need, but to give you what you haven't thought you needed yet, because the world is constantly changing. How will this empower you to achieve this? How will these solutions? Connected English learning programs, where the courseware is aligned to assessment, where it is aligned to certification, and the training that teachers get is aligned to the courseware they use and the assessment and the certification, that it is seamless and built on the same syllabuses and the same methodologies and the same ideas, so that if you change any part of that the following year, you don't have to change it all. Enhanced teaching platforms, new game-changing digital platforms that think about tomorrow rather than just today, that can be used both in the hybrid and non-hybrid situations, and also teacher training to support it. English language communities where teachers can talk to each other across the world, who can talk to advisors across the world, so we all support each other. And business excellence kits for schools, so schools can realize their potential, both for the learners and for the parents, and really understand how valuable their teachers are in those institutions. These are the things we believe in passionately, and these are the responsibility that we have to you as teachers in the future. An English learning program that works, based around a standard scale that is internationally recognized and proven to track students on a daily basis, which we call Global Scale of English. Everything on this. What is this? This is Pearson Connected English Learning Program. And I hope that you will have the opportunity to see Pearson Connected English Learning Program in action, because we are committed to this and we are passionate about it, making teaching easier and learning more successful. and build your learners and your confidence so you both thrive in the future that we face. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening to me. I don't know how much time I have left. I suspect I'm over time because I love talking and I'm far too passionate. But if anybody has anything they want to say, any quick questions, I'm more than happy to take them. One thank you is a nice birthday present. I wonder what many thank yous are. A super birthday present. Thank you so much, everyone, for all your thoughts. There doesn't seem to be any questions. Let me just check if there is anything in the participant hands up. There, again, Salome seems to have a hand up still, but I'm guessing that's from earlier. So I better let you go off and have some coffee or a cigarette or anything that you want to do. It's been lovely talking to you all today. And I hope to see you all again somewhere online or face to face. Thank you very much, everyone.